Recording. Okay, so we're moving on to section 2 in your book, rational numbers. Just to cover what the difference between a rational number and an irrational number is. A rational number is a number that has a definitive endpoint, or it goes like 0.6 forever. It starts to be a repeating integer. Okay? Whereas an irrational number doesn't have an endpoint, doesn't have a repeating integer. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind on that one is pi, right? Y'all know that pi, theoretically, it goes on forever and it never repeats a pattern. Okay, so square roots go hand in hand with that. So the first thing we're going to go over in the new section is square roots. So we're going to start with simplifying square roots. Now, does everybody have a calculator? Go ahead and get it out, just because I highly doubt any of y'all in here can do square root in your head. If there's usage, you just have to memorize it. All right, we're good to go? So, just make sure we all understand the concept. What's square root of 9?
3.
Everybody agree with that? What about square root of 16? 4. All right. Now that you have your calculators, tell me what the square root of 37 is to the nearest 100th. Anybody want to give it a go? 6.08. 6.08. All right. So, simplifying, what you'll notice in this section is you're really trying to only working with things that have square roots that come to a whole number. All right? So, to simplify that, we'll start with square root of 100. So obviously we know what the square root of 100 is. It's 10, right? But just for this example, we're going to simplify it. Now, when you simplify this, you're looking for numbers that have a square root that's a whole number. All right? So we could simplify this to, 5 times 20, but neither of those have a square root as a whole number, right? We could do it to times 50. But again, neither of those have a whole number as a square root, right? But 4 times 25 does. And the square root, basically you can square both of those. Get the square root of both of those, which square root of 4 is 2. And the square root of 25 is 5. So we still end up with 10, just as if we had just straight up taken the square root of 100. All right? Now, they're not always going to end up with just the whole number at the end. What you might end up with, something looks like this. If we do square root of 75 and we want to simplify that, well, basically we're going to end up with square root of 25 times 3. All right? Can one of those be squared to a whole number? 25. So square root of 25 is 5. And that would be our answer. You see how that worked? When I simplified it down, I found one number that we could square to a whole number and one number we couldn't. So the answer, at least for this far into the lesson or the section, for our answer, it's going to be 5 times the square root of 3. Whenever the 5 is just sitting, I mean, y'all know how that works. Like the 5 just beside the square root of 3 is the same as 5 times the square root of 3, right? And something to keep in mind when we get to like adding, subtracting, multiplying, stuff like that. If you just had square root of 3 there, that's interpreted as 1 times the square root of 3. All right? So, does everybody understand this part? All right, let me give y'all one to work on y'all. Real quick. Everybody having a little trouble?
There's not.
It's a trick question. There's no way to simplify that. Because 17, for starters, is a prime number, right? It's only divisible by 1. So, you are going to have stuff in this section that's just impossible to do. All right? So, I apologize for throwing a trick question at you, but I want to drive that point home. Some stuff is just not going to be, you're not going to be able to do it. But this one you will. Simplify that for me. All right, everybody got an answer? Look like that? All right, anybody got any questions? We're about to move on to multiplying square roots. We good right here? All right. So, when we multiply square roots, let's start with something simple. Actually, it's going to be pretty simple. It's also going to show you a little trick. So, if we do the square root of 7 times the square root of 7. All right, everybody paying attention? Next step is we're essentially just going to put them together and do 7 times 7. Comes out to 49. Well, what's the square root of 49? 7. So the answer here is 7. Anytime you have the same numbers in a square root, like the same, like if it was the square root of 5 times the square root of 5, or the square root of 1,213 times the square root of 1,213? Well, the answer is going to be the number. All right? Now, do y'all understand why that is? It's because when you put them under the square root, you're timesing it by itself. Well, what is your square root? It's the number that times itself. Basically, you take a number and you see what other number times itself would make that number. So 3 times 3 is 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. 4 times 4 is 16, so the square root of 16 is what? 4, right? What'd you say? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not making fun of you guys. Crack me up. All right, so let's work another one that's not gonna come out to be itself. Let's do square root of 6 times square root of 5. So next step is gonna be put them together, and you got the square root of 6 times 5. That's gonna give us the square root of 30. Can that be simplified at all? I don't believe it can either. All right. So let's do the do what? Yeah, I'll go ahead and figure that one out for me. Everybody done? Get done? All right. Is that where you ended up? Was your final answer 10? What'd you do?
I know what I did wrong.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all right though. If you know what you did wrong, you know how to do it right. Right? All right. Let's anybody got any questions so far? All right, let's do one more of these. Let's do the square root of 6 times the square root of 2. Show me what you come up with. this look like what y'all got? The first steps, you put the 6 times 2 together, and you get the square root of 12. Well, square root of 12 can be simplified, right? So, go over here and do square root of 12. We simplify it out to the square root of 4 times 3. 4 can be squared to a whole number. So, we end up with 2 times the square root of 3. Everybody understand that? Any questions? We're about to move on to, y'all okay back there, Mackenzie?
She's done like several of these, and she's doing them right and getting the answer, but when she types it in, it keeps telling her it's wrong. She says it's done it several times on the two, three more. It's
Okay.
on, principal rate and time, like interest.
Okay. Well, keep trying right now. Let me finish recording this video, then I'll get it sorted. All right. Okay, so we're good with how to multiply these, right? All right. Now we're going to talk about dividing them, which is going to be essentially the same process. So, if we have square root of 75 over the square root of 3, or divided by the square root of 3. Now what our next step is going to be is to combine these just like we did with multiplication. So you're going to get the square root of 75 divided by 3. Okay? 75 divided by 3 is 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. All right, does everybody understand what we did there?
In a fraction.
Everybody good? Y'all write any more of this down? Good. All right. Let's do square root of 90 divided by the square root of 2. So what's my first step going to be?
Divide 9 by 2 and square root.
Getting ahead of yourself. Just, I mean, technically you're right, but first step's going to be to bring the division together. So it's going to be a square root. Instead of the square root of 90 by 2, the square root of 90 divided by the square root of 2, we're going to change it up to the square root of 90 divided by 2. All right, that comes out to 45. Now, can 45 be simplified? Square root of 45. What we can do is change that into the square root of 9 times 5. Right? So, square root of 9 is 3. So our final answer is 3 times square root of 5. Everybody understand how we got there? All right. And especially when we get, we're going to do just a little bit more on the division, but when we get into adding and subtracting, you'll see that this functions a lot like fractions do. All right? But there is going to be one curveball. We'll get there. All right? Let's do. All right, y'all go ahead and figure that one out for me. you done? All right, what answer did you get?
2.
2? Sure.
Does 4 not reduce?
No. After you've got the square root out of the symbol, you don't reduce it any further. Yeah. That was my bad for not covering that. So yeah, if you get 16 here, the square root of 16 is 4. At that point, you don't reduce it any further. What'd you get? 4?
Is when you know
All right.
it's 14.
And you would have got it right, but I didn't cover that properly. So I think we all understand how this works. All right. Now here's, we're going to do addition. And in the same way that fractions have common denominators when you add them or subtract them, with this one, whatever the radical is, which that's the fancy phrase for your number in the square root sign. The radical has to be the same for the two to be added together. And you can simplify one or both to get there, but unlike fractions, you can't just times them. You know what I mean? Like with fraction, if you add 1/2 plus 1/3, you know, you could times 3 by 2 and 2 by 3 to get 1/6 for both of them. But with these, you can't. You can only simplify. So just to start it out, let's do 7 times the square root of 2 plus, yeah, 5 times the square root of 2. All right, so we have the same radical for both of them. So it's really easy. It's just 12 times square root of 2. If you have the same radical, you used to add these two numbers together. It's really that easy. I know you don't believe me, but it is. All right, so and I mean, it's the same thing with subtraction. If you did 4 to the square root times square root of 2 minus 6 to the square root of 2, your answer is going to be -2 times square root of 2. But where it gets a little tricky. Let's do
I'm telling you.
2 times the square root of 2 plus 2 times the square root of 8. Now I'm going to go ahead and work through this one. So we can't really do anything with square root of 2, right? That can't be simplified. Agreed? But 8 can, right? So with the 8, we can have 2 times square root of 4 times 2. When you bring this 4 outside of the When you square root it, you're gonna times it by this number. Alright, so square root of 4 is 2, right? 2 times 2 is 4. Over the square root of 2. So, the answer to this one is gonna be 6 over the square root of 2. Now, do y'all understand how we got there?
How did you get the 4 on the outside?
I square rooted this 4, and square root of 4 is 2, right? And 2 times the 2 on the outside comes to 4. That makes sense? Yeah. I'll let you do one on your own if you get it, everybody understands it. We'll move on, I'll let you get to work on your homework. Sound good? Alright. Let's do 4 times the square root of 8 times, or not times, it's gonna be minus 7 times the square root of 18. Now you're gonna have to simplify both sides, but I have faith that you can all do it. Is everybody arriving at negative 13 times the square root of 2? What about you? See what you did.
I missed that.
Okay. Oh, let's see. 4 times 2, 9 times 2, so that's right. So, when you square root 4 times by this 4, right? So square root of 4 is 2 times 4 is 8. Got it? Same thing right here. Square root of 9 is 3 times 7 is 20. Then you minus those. Yep. You get it? The video will be online. So you can review that. Also, if you continue to have problems, this goes for anybody. Just email me and I'll either explain it and find more remedial videos for you to watch. I know it's kind of screwy with the pandemic and everything, so. All right, anybody got any questions?
So we just put that.
Nobody? All right.
That's the same.
Homework is gonna start on page 22. All right, let's do 17 through 56. Actually on page 23. Actually, let me stop this here video. How long did I teach today? 30 minutes, holy cow.